Ann-Margret and Elvis Presley, two names that once ignited screens, hearts and headlines, shared a connection that time could never erase. At 75, Ann-Margret finally opens her heart, revealing the truth about the man she loved and the day she lost him forever. For decades, she remained silent, protecting a bond that was deeper than fame and more enduring than rumor. Now, in her own words, she brings that story into the light. The world knew them as co-stars in Viva Las Vegas, a film that captured their dazzling chemistry. But behind the glamour lived a love that neither could fully claim. It was passionate, forbidden, and real. Elvis was the king of rock and roll, adored by millions. Yet with Ann-Margret, he found understanding that went beyond applause. Their connection became a secret rhythm, an unspoken melody of affection, loyalty, and heartbreak. After years of silence, Ann-Margret's truth changes everything. Her confession is not for sympathy or attention, but for remembrance. It is the unveiling of a love story once hidden by fame, now told by a woman who has finally found peace in revealing the man who was, and always will be, her greatest love. Ann-Margret Olsen was born in 1941 in Stockholm, Sweden, and raised in a home where discipline and faith shaped her early years. Her family immigrated to the United States when she was a child, settling in Illinois, where her passion for performance quickly emerged. By the early 1960s, her striking beauty, fierce energy, and undeniable talent made her one of Hollywood's rising stars. Audiences saw a woman who radiated confidence, but behind the spotlight was someone deeply private, longing for connection beyond the world of cameras and applause. Elvis Presley, born in 1935 in Tupelo, Mississippi, had already lived a lifetime before meeting her. By the time he returned from his military service in 1960, he was more than a musician. He was a global icon. Fame surrounded him wherever he went. Yet it came with loneliness and a burden that few could understand. Despite his fame, Elvis longed for something real, something that reminded him of who he was before the world claimed him as its own. Their paths crossed in 1963, on the set of Viva Las Vegas. From the moment they met, a quiet electricity filled the air. Those who were there would later recall the way their eyes met, the natural rhythm that passed between them. Their chemistry was immediate, genuine, and impossible to disguise. On camera, it looked effortless, two stars in perfect sync, but behind the scenes it was more than performance, it was connection. During filming, their bond deepened. They spent long hours rehearsing, laughing and sharing stories about music, family, and faith. Ann-Margret once described their connection as equal, a rare admission in a time when few dared to speak of Elvis as anything other than a legend. They shared a love for motorcycles, music, and the thrill of life. To the outside world, they were co-stars, but to each other they were mirrors. Two people living under the same pressure, both searching for honesty in a world built on illusion. Their friendship soon became something more profound. Between takes, the conversations grew longer, the silences more meaningful. What began as mutual admiration turned into affection, and then into love. Yet from the beginning there was an unspoken understanding between them. Theirs was a connection destined to exist in the shadows. Elvis was still tied to Priscilla Beaulieu, the young woman waiting at Graceland. The tension between love and loyalty began to take shape, setting the course for heartbreak neither could escape. As production continued, the film became more than entertainment. It became a reflection of the relationship unfolding behind the scenes. Each musical number carried a trace of their real emotions, every glance holding a story the world would never fully see. Their connection gave Viva Las Vegas its spark, a spark that would make it one of Elvis's most memorable films. By the time filming ended, what had begun as a cinematic partnership had turned into something far deeper. It was a love neither could deny, but both knew could never last. They stood at the height of fame, surrounded by cameras, yet completely alone in their truth. What followed would test not only their hearts but their ability to protect a bond that fame could easily destroy. When filming for Viva Las Vegas ended in 1963, the world saw two rising stars who had delivered one of the most vibrant performances of the decade. What it did not see was the quiet understanding that lingered between them, the knowledge that what had blossomed during those months could not easily survive the realities waiting outside the set. Ann-Margret and Elvis returned to their separate worlds, yet neither could let go of what had begun in that shared space of music and laughter. For nearly a year, their relationship continued in the shadows. They spoke often, exchanged letters, and found rare moments to see one another away from public eyes. Ann-Margret was devoted but realistic. Elvis was torn between the life he wanted and the expectations that surrounded him. His relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu had already become a subject of public attention, and by 1967, she would become his wife. That commitment was a decision shaped by duty and image as much as affection, and it forced Elvis to turn away from the one woman who truly understood him. Ann-Margret never spoke publicly about the pain that followed. While magazines speculated and reporters whispered, she kept her silence, guarding the dignity of a man she had once loved deeply. When asked about their connection, she described it only as very strong and very real. Her restraint became its own expression of love, a quiet loyalty that endured long after their romance had ended. As Elvis's life grew more complicated, their bond transformed rather than disappeared. They remained in contact, sending notes of encouragement and speaking occasionally by phone. Ann-Margret supported him from a distance, celebrating his success while witnessing his growing struggles with fame, health, and isolation. Through the years, she carried the memory of who he had been before the weight of the world pressed too heavily upon him. By the time Elvis married Priscilla, Ann-Margret's heart had accepted what her mind already knew. Some loves are not meant to be lived in the open, yet their emotional connection never fully faded. When Elvis performed in Las Vegas during the 1970s, Ann-Margret would attend his shows quietly, never seeking attention, only presence. The unspoken bond between them had shifted from passion to compassion, a tenderness that time could not erase. Their story became one of restraint and reverence rather than scandal. Ann-Margret continued her own career, earning critical acclaim and awards, but she rarely spoke of her personal life. Elvis, meanwhile, remained trapped between the myth he embodied and the man he longed to be. His songs often carried echoes of longing, and those who knew him said that when he mentioned her name, there was always softness in his tone. What once burned bright had become a quiet ache, an enduring connection defined not by possession, but by memory. Their love had transformed into something sacred, existing beyond fame, distance, and time. And though the world saw Elvis Presley as the king, Ann-Margret would always remember him simply as the man who once made her laugh, who once looked at her as if nothing else in the world existed. When Elvis Presley passed away in 1977, Ann-Margret was performing at the Hilton in Lake Tahoe. The moment the news reached her, the light seemed to leave the stage. She canceled her show that evening and quietly made her way to Graceland, away from cameras and headlines. Few people knew she was one of the first to arrive. She came not as a celebrity, but as a friend who had once shared the truest part of his heart. The grief she carried was not loud. It lived in silence, in the space where memory meets gratitude. Those who were present remembered how she comforted his family and stayed out of the public eye. She did not speak to the press or give interviews. She understood that some losses are too sacred to be translated into words. Years later, when she was finally asked about that day, her answer was simple. Our relationship was very special. That was all. Her restraint spoke louder than any confession could have. For Ann-Margret, remembering Elvis was not about fame or nostalgia. It was about honoring a man who had given her courage, laughter, and tenderness at a time when both were still discovering themselves. She continued to work, to perform, and to live, yet his memory traveled with her, a quiet companion through the years that followed. She often said that Elvis had a gift for making everyone feel seen, that behind the fame there lived a boy from Tupelo, who never lost his longing for home. In interviews, she reflected on how deeply his humanity affected her. She described how his laughter filled a room, how his kindness extended beyond the stage, and how his presence lingered in the simplest things: a melody, a moment of stillness, a flash of light. Her words carried no bitterness, only truth. Ann-Margret had known the man behind the legend, and that truth remained her own private grace. As decades passed, the world changed, yet the story of Elvis and Ann-Margret endured. It survived not through gossip or sensationalism, but through sincerity. Their connection reminded generations that love can exist in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. While others sought to define what they had, she understood that their bond had no need for explanation. It had already been written in the songs they sang, in the glances they shared, and in the silence that followed. Ann-Margret's later years became a testament to dignity and devotion. She continued performing, earning awards and recognition for her work, yet she often carried a sense of groundedness that fame could not touch. When asked about Elvis, her tone was always gentle. There was affection, nostalgia, and a trace of the ache that never fully disappeared. But above all, there was peace. Elvis's death had left a void that no one could fill, but it had also given her perspective, a deeper understanding of love's permanence. It taught her that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to awaken parts of us that live on long after they are gone. For Ann-Margret, that was Elvis's true legacy. Not the crown he wore, but the humanity he shared, the love he gave, and the memory that would always live quietly in her heart. As the years passed, Ann-Margret learned to live not with loss, but with gratitude. The pain that once shadowed her became something softer, something that carried the warmth of remembrance rather than the sting of regret. In honoring Elvis's memory, she had learned the quiet strength of acceptance. Love, she came to understand, does not end. It changes shape. It becomes a story we carry within us, told through kindness, humility, and truth. In interviews during the later chapters of her life, Ann-Margret spoke of Elvis with the same grace that had always defined her. She never sought to rewrite history, or claim what could never belong to her alone. Instead, she offered honesty. She said that Elvis had been her soulmate in spirit, someone who understood her heart without words. She believed their connection had been written long before they met, and though circumstances had separated them, the bond remained untouched by time. She continued her career with renewed purpose, bringing the same emotional depth that once captured Elvis's admiration. Her performances in films such as Carnal Knowledge and Tommy earned her critical acclaim, yet behind each role lived a trace of that early tenderness. She carried with her the lessons he left behind, the belief in passion, discipline, and the courage to feel deeply. Even as the decades turned, she spoke of him not as a figure of the past, but as a lasting part of her journey. When anniversaries of his passing arrived, Ann-Margret often sent flowers to Graceland. She never announced it. There were no headlines or cameras, only quiet remembrance. Those gestures reflected the kind of love that survives beyond applause, a love that belongs to no one's imagination but her own. For her, Elvis was never just the king of rock and roll. He was the man who once looked at her with understanding, the friend who believed in her when Hollywood doubted her, the soul who showed her that vulnerability was not weakness but truth. In her later years, Ann-Margret found peace in knowing that their story had endured with dignity. She married Roger Smith, who stood by her side until his passing in 2017, and she often said that she had been blessed with two great loves in her life. One had taught her the meaning of passion, the other had taught her the meaning of loyalty. Together they formed the foundation of a life defined by grace rather than loss. Today, when she reflects on those golden years, her words remain gentle and sincere. She does not dwell on what might have been, Instead, she celebrates what was: the laughter, the music, the friendship that time could never erase. In speaking of Elvis, she reminds the world that some connections are eternal, surviving not through possession but through remembrance. Ann-Margret once said that when she closes her eyes and hears the opening notes of Love Me Tender, she feels him near, not as a ghost, but as a presence woven into the rhythm of her life. In that feeling lies the truth she always carried: real love does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes a guiding light, one that softens the years, and reminds us that to have loved deeply, even once, is to have lived fully. And so, her story ends not in tragedy, but in peace. The girl who once danced beside the king now walks in quiet grace, forever bound by the memory of a love that changed them both. For more emotional stories, check out this video.